know you're applauding because it means there's good news on the way, and indeed there is. My name is Brenda Eaton. I'm chair of the Board of Trustees for the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education. And I'd just like to add my thanks before we move on to Peter and to Michael. If somebody does an encore, you get to thank them twice. We get to thank Peter and Michael many times. I would like now, though, to introduce you to Maria Shriver, a name known to many of you. Maria is an award-winning journalist. She's a best-selling author, and of course, she's the First Lady of California. She has long championed the working poor and the intellectually disabled, but she has also been a champion of women and women's issues for many years. In so doing, she's a mother of 4, and she, for also the last 5 years, has been host of the Premier Women's Forum in the US. And that's an organization that awards the Minerva Award. This year, in 2009, she was awarded the Xinyuan Pathfinder to Peace. And Maria is coming on now with Jody Williams, who you had a chance to meet a couple of times over the last few days. And for 10 minutes or so, Maria and Jody will have a conversation, and then the Dalai Lama will join us. I introduce you to Maria Shriver.
Okay, well, I think this is where His Holiness sits.
Oh.
Yes, don't sit there. We actually have no idea what we're doing. This is like, we're vamping until His Holiness gets here, but I guess the good news is he's left the hotel. He has left the hotel. And then he'll come here, and there'll be a lot of brouhaha back there. But so we thought, like women do, never at a loss for words, we'd come out here and just, you know, talk a little bit. I was just saying, Jody came to the women's conference that we have in California every October. We have about 25,000 women, and we have some men, and I always never understand why more men don't come, because 25,000 women, why wouldn't every man want to come, right? But we talk a lot about empowering women, and we talk about compassion, and we really try to emphasize to each and every person that comes there that they are the ones they've been waiting for, not to look outside for someone else to put into action what they feel. And you're a perfect example of being an architect of change. I think that's true. You know, you saw an issue and you didn't sit around and wait for somebody else to come and do it. You did it. And I think that's, most people feel like, well, I can't do that, someone else has to do it. Did you ever feel like that?
Hell no.
Hell no. You can't talk like that when His Holiness gets here, so get it all out right now.
Yes,
to talk about peace and compassion.
Oh no, I'm going to talk about a different kind of peace and compassion. And I'm going to ask you to please turn up the lights in the audience so I can see. When the Dalai Lama gets back here, he may want it dim. I don't. I want to see who we're conversing with, please. I'm going to give you a break.
You're going to give me a break? Or what are you going to do? I'm just getting going. You haven't even answered my question yet. You haven't even answered the question.
No. All right, I'll be back.
You'll be back. Okay, now you're going to make a statement. Okay.
I'll be back. You wouldn't want me to take my clothes off, would you? I'm going to take a minute before the Dalai Lama gets here, and poor Maria hasn't been here with us, so she hasn't had time to learn our compassion here. So you can deep breathe. And I learned tap dancing in grade school, but that's not why I'm standing here. There's been an elephant in this room, and I'm gonna... Is that the elephant? How'd you get up there? The elephant in the room is that we haven't mentioned Tibet. And we have mentioned Aung San Suu Kyi, our sister Nobel Laureate, who is imprisoned in Burma. We have mentioned Gaza and my sister laureate Mairead Maguire trying to take humanitarian aid there and being arrested in international water. We have mentioned Darfur. We have mentioned the Congo. But here we are with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and many other people from Tibet. And we have it, hi, the elephant up there is a Tibetan elephant, I'm learning. Yet we haven't said, and we haven't acknowledged Tibet, and I assume it's maybe because we consider His Holiness to be, in some ways, the embodiment. But I think that it is fitting that we just mention that this is the 50th year of exile. This year marks 50 years in exile, and the people of Tibet are still suffering under oppressive rule. And I think it's a good thing to just acknowledge the people of Tibet while we're here. And I would just like to say that the other Nobel laureates, the other peace laureates, are launching a letter of support for His Holiness and the people of Tibet. You will be able to sign on with your own words of compassion. You can use your own creativity, maybe make a Blue Women's group and do something that way. I have no idea. But you can find it at the tibetfund.org, and it will be up on the October 15th. And please add your words to the people of Tibet for 50 years of not being able to really claim their own place. So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, now come back here.
That wasn't so bad.
Yeah. But I think it's really interesting that so many people want to bring about change in this world. People who've come to this conference want it to be a more peaceful planet. They want to do something that will change the direction that we're going. You did something that changed the direction. What's the best advice you could give to someone who thinks, you know, I'm not capable of bringing about that change myself?
I think that we are purposefully made to feel that it is so overwhelming that nothing can be done to make the world a better place. That if we can't make peace happen like this, if we can't make the world better like that, there's no point in trying. And I absolutely, positively disbelieve that. I believe that if each and every one of us in the world who want to see a better world seized upon one thing that makes them passionate to change and turned that passion into action, we would indeed have a better planet. And it is not magic. It's, you know, some of you have heard me say it before, get up off your butt and go do something. And don't expect somebody else to give you the answer. There's no excuse in today's world. One can Google and find an organization, go volunteer.
But people, Jody, are often feel like, well, I'm not smart enough, I'm not connected enough, I can't take on that issue, and therefore I'm not capable. But what would you say to someone? Would you say start small? What are the important steps to take to become an architect of change like you did?
My own story wouldn't be anyone else's, but I was given a leaflet on a subway stop in Washington when I was a teacher, Washington, D.C. And it was mimeographed. The old people here, like myself, will know what a mimeographed pamphlet is. Some of you young people would have no idea, but it turns your hands the color of the ink on the piece of paper. And it said El Salvador and other Vietnam with a question mark. And I am old enough to have protested the Vietnam War. And when the pamphlet indicated that the United States was intervening in yet another part of the world to mess with their self-determination, I got a little agitated.
Okay, now you have to stop talking because they're like waving over there, and the real architect of change.
Now that is just not fair, Your Holiness.
Okay.
He does this to me all the time.
Okay. Okay. Did he have a good lunch? You have a good lunch? Yes? He thinks I'm crazy. It's okay. Okay. He's taking off his shoes. Maybe I'll do the same thing. Okay. So the last time I had the chance to speak with His Holiness was in 2006 in a room of, it was about 14,000 women at the time. And His Holiness asked the crowd and said, women need to be involved in more influential positions in the world. You said the world will be better off because women have more warm-heartedness, they are more nurturing, they are more compassionate. How are we doing in the world? How are we doing? How have we done in those last 3 years? Are women making a difference in the world?
I don't know.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. He always says, I don't know, and then I push him and he goes, okay, well, I know a little bit. I'm like, the man has written so many books and he like reads all day, meditates, and he's like the smartest person. You do too now.
I think at least I'm quite sure, I think as a result of there are sort of conversation, and also many occasions in Europe and also America, I, on a number of occasions, you see, appealing people in general, particularly female, because of biological factor, female more sensitivity about others' pains and suffering. So our time is we need special effort for promotion of human compassion. In that respect, female should make a more important role. So perhaps sort of appealing, having these things, maybe more number of female may get more self-confidence and more willingness to do. That I'm quite sure. But real significance because of that change, I don't know. So you should investigate.
I am. Well, there's a lot of women who have self-confidence, but they hit barriers. And people perhaps don't think that they can run companies or run countries or be who they imagine themselves to be. So what would you say to men who perhaps don't think that women can do all those things?
I think at least in India, one time Prime Minister, one lady Prime Minister, not necessarily, I think, more sort of making competition by mail, by through vote. So, Lady Indira Gandhi ji, of course, daughter of Pandit Nehru, that also makes some differences. But basically, herself shows ability and efficient. So ultimately, depend on yourself. More hard work and prove, you see, you can do more, then more voters will come.
Then more voters will come if you prove you can do hard work. You think so? Yeah.
I think that's the way. I think one of the greatness of democracy is, I think, the individual people, they show them ability, and I think nowadays maybe people more conscious about sincerity, truthfulness, honesty.
Yes.
I think sometimes you see people more attention about just ability. Nowadays, I think moral principle is also, I think, becoming more and more important factor.
Your Holiness, so many people feel that the qualities that are needed to succeed in business and politics are the opposite of compassion. That it's very tough out there, it's very competitive, it's, as they say in America, a dog-eat-dog world, and that if you lead with compassion, you won't succeed.
That, I think, the misunderstanding about compassion and meaning of compassion. I often used to make clear the compassionate practitioner, compassionate person, not necessarily be weak.
Not weak.
Not weak. Now, here we have to make a distinction, the action and the actor. So as far as action is concerned, sometimes we need counter measure, and including a little bit harsh method. So in that respect, sometimes for immediate motivation, some anger also have a role. But then towards actor, always, a person always maintain compassion, sense of for the person. So there is no contradiction. Immediate motivation, anger, and tough measure, harsh method, that does not mean you really feel anger towards the person.
Please
so that we can do.
How do we use our anger to get something done and then switch it to be compassionate to our neighbor?
So such case, real motivation is compassion. Then in order to bring more harsh method, immediate motivation, anger. That's the way.
Something that's always interested me about you, Your Holiness, is how you often talk about being able to be content and still outraged at social injustice. How do those two things coexist?
So this is just like this, as I mentioned earlier. Because of your serious concern about the well-being of the community or people, so these wrongdoings are very harmful. So because of your concern about the well-being of the humanity, so these wrongdoings, actually all these, I think, carried by the people, or should they, mainly due to short-sighted, narrow-minded. They simply, seeing an immediate sort of area. So this wrong method or wrongdoing actually harmful ultimately themselves. But without knowing that, just too much sort of emotion, just immediate sort of benefit. So therefore, there is reason to feel sympathy or concern for these people. So with that kind of motivation, then a harsh word or criticism, like that. So there's no contradiction.
No contradiction.
Actually, compassion means well-being of other. Caring for well-being of other. So anything which ultimately harmful, then you have to oppose.
Anything that is harmful, you have to oppose.
Anything that is harmful to the others' welfare.
To others' welfare, you oppose.
And yourself also. I often is telling people, if it's a mad dog coming, then if you sit, compassion, foolish.
Foolish.
Oh, foolish.
Foolish, okay. Yeah. What do you do to the mad dog that's coming?
Oh, I think two ways. Either run away. One time in Nobulinga, we had one, Lhasa, yes. That day we have some, because of the offering, some ritual, some monk, and including my two tutors also there. So we carry some sort of ritual things. And then at break, I returned to my own house. So when I coming, walking, I noticed one big dog,
A mad dog.
Without a leash.
Without a leash.
Without a leash, yeah.
Coming at you.
No. There I saw. Then I ran. So at the next sort of session, when I reached there, my two tutors laughing towards me, because they noticed I run so fast. Because that energy brought by fear. So according to scientists, when fear emotion come, then the blood, more blood goes to leg muscle in order to run. So I use that.
Your Holiness, what are you afraid of in 2009? What do you fear?
Lodinal. I think the 2008 10th March crisis in Tibet. So at that time, actually, afternoon 10th March, I received information from Lhasa, the Tibetan, some Tibetan already moving for demonstration. Then I immediately got some kind of the experience which occurred 1959 10th March. Feeling of anguish or helplessness and much worry, anxiety, like that. So that in recent years, that's one of the I think more serious concern. But fortunately, so the disturbances of my sleep, no single day.
His Holiness was saying that unfortunately he did not have a single sleepless night.
But in terms of the future of the world, what is he afraid of? Is he afraid of us not being aware of our environment? Is he afraid of war? What does he worry about today, given the situation in the world? Is it poverty?
Oh, I think environment issue.
The environment.
And then, of course, the gap, rich and poor.
Poverty.
And those not only global level, but also the national level. This huge gap. And then those poor people, really helpless. And then sometimes, you see, there are sort of difficulties bring more frustration. Frustration creates sometimes anger. So then violence. So that's really sad.
There has been a lot of research done that says that one of the best ways to alleviate that gap and to deal with the poverty around the world is to empower young girls, to invest in young girls, empower them, educate them, do microlending for women. Do you believe in that, and will you make that part of your dialogue even into the new year and beyond? The emphasis on young girls.
Yes, no doubt, yes. I haven't detailed sort of knowledge about that, but maybe the female and sort of because of that take special care about their youngsters. So maybe, I don't know.
Maybe that's a good thing to talk about.
There's no doubt. That's good. Yes, that's right.
You like it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. You said when you were here, I guess the other day, you declared yourself a feminist.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. What does that mean to you?
Huh?
What does it mean to you to be a feminist?
Not much differences. Whether you call feminist, whether you call Kasoda. The other days I mentioned whether you call me God King or living Buddha or demon, doesn't matter.
So let's go with the God, King, the Buddha, and the feminist. I think.
So I mentioned, you see...
I'm a supporter of women's rights. Those.
Because, you see, I emphasize a special rule of the female. Now that very much relevant to today's world. So therefore, some people may describe me as a feminist. That I just mentioned like that. I don't know.
I think that's good that you declared yourself a feminist, because it means that you believe that the qualities that are inherent in women can perhaps have a positive influence on the world, and that women should have all the same rights throughout the world. Do you think there'll ever be a female Dalai Lama?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
That I always mentioned.
I know.
They actually, as early as '69, I officially stated that whether the Dalai Lama institution should continue or not up to Tibetan people. So that means that majority of Tibetan people feel the Dalai Lama institution is no longer relevant, and then this institution, I think 600 years, right? 6th century sort of tradition, and there's no problem. Because some people have the impression that the Dalai Lama institution is so important about Tibetan Buddhism. That's wrong. So then in case concerned people feel this institution should continue, should preserve, then the next question is how to succeed, right? What is successor? How select the successor. There also is a different method, possibility. There are different methods. One I think quite reliable, quite safe sort of method is like the succession according to the Pope among the cardinal.
The system of choosing the Pope.
That's also very, very sound, very good. And then among Tibetan also, that kind of a practice is already there. Last several centuries, that kind of way is there. Then should people should choose the traditional way, then the selection or the choosing reincarnation. So in that case, in case the female Dalai Lama can be more sort of effective, more useful, then female Dalai Lama. Why not? And then also, in Tibetan tradition, there are some higher reincarnated Lama institution, actually female. I know one, I think 700-year-old institution of high reincarnated Lama, always female. So like that.
Do you think if there were to be a female Dalai Lama, she would be accepted?
Yeah.
By the other monks?
No, under certain circumstances, you see, the people, I think, as I mentioned earlier, you see, if the circumstances are such, the female Dalai Lama is more useful, then it will come. No problem.
No problem.
Some individual may resent. That's always happened.
Your Holiness, I say to my children all the time, you have to practice compassion, forgiveness, you can be successful, and also be known for being compassionate. And they always say to me, be an example of one famous person who's compassionate other than the Dalai Lama.
The late Mother Teresa, women.
Mother Teresa.
Wonderful, wonderful lady.
Yeah.
Wonderful lady.
So we have two, you and Mother Teresa.
Yeah. I think because you see, people or media do not much pay attention. Otherwise, in these slums, India or Africa, in many places, I think there must be some people who really sacrificing their own privilege or their own well-being in order to serve those helpless people. I think there are thousands.
I agree with you, and I'm sure everybody here has met people that they think are out there changing the world through compassion and through love and through peace. How do we get the media to pay attention to those people and to that story?
I'm not going to leave it at that. I think personally, so therefore I always telling media people they should pay more attention they should pay equally attention about the positive things, not only just the negative.
You think the media should be encouraged to pay more attention or equal attention to people's positive traits? More balanced reporting.
Otherwise, you see, in the last several years, quite often, some people ask me their anxiety about the future of humanity. So that means they have the impression, we human beings is so bad, so the world now becoming more doomed. So that impression happened because in media usually, so all the pictures or televisions or news, all this negative thing, killing, murder, or like that. So then people get the impression of humanity basically negative.
And do you feel it's the opposite? Are you optimistic about the world today?
Oh yes. Basically, I believe, not only just believe, I think there's reasons. Basic human nature is more gentleness, more compassionate, because our life starts with compassion. Clear. In our blood, there is some kind of also the ability to appreciate compassion, affection. So, reason or the indication is person, mental state, more compassionate, more compassion, more warm-heartedness. The stress reduce, blood pressure reduce, sleep better. So that
means easier said than done.
So that means this body go very well with this peaceful mind, compassionate mind. Anger, hatred, according to some scientists, even you see, eating our immune system. So therefore, this negative emotion, destructive emotion, also part of our mind. Biologically speaking, and up to a certain extent, these are necessary. Attachment brings the positive factor which is useful for our survival. So attachment is bring these things. Anger expel the destructive, any element which danger for our survival. So that's biological factor. In order to carry action, bring together or expel, we need motivation. In motivation level, now two things, attachment and anger. However, our life begins not by anger, but by attachment, love, loving kindness. So that's more, I think 24 hours, that's necessary. Anger, hatred, short period. Under particular circumstances, it develops. But generally, the compassion.
Except compassion for the sound man.
So
Your Holiness, you've been
so
hearing...
therefore, compassion really works from the beginning up to death. At the time of death, a person knows now no longer usefulness of your friend, but still at that moment, the person surrounded by a friend who really loves you, who really shows you affection, then the dying person feels happy. So therefore, So basically, we human being, human nature, I believe, gentleness or compassionate. Then, I think the point is, our intelligence must be disposal of human affection. Then our life will become very good. But the mistake is, when we grown up, we neglect about these basic values and more attention about sophistication of the brain. That the brain, like any sort of knowledge can be destructive or constructive. Knowledge itself, something neutral. So other factor, the knowledge guided by hatred, then destructive. Knowledge guided by loving kindness, then positive, like that.
Your Holiness, you've been here for 3 days talking to leaders from all over the world about compassion, a charter on...
Not all over the world.
Not all over the... They're not here from all over the world?
Kaza.
Well, from parts of the world, 3/4 of the world. California, I don't know. But what have you learned? What has surprised you? What did you learn in Vancouver?
Oh, yesterday I learned, yesterday in our meeting, I learned, or I very much impressed one Bangladesh gentleman. He start on a small level, on NGO.
An NGO.
Then is gradually national level. Then not only that, he exported his sort of expertise or his sort of experience to other countries. Oh, that's really wonderful, really wonderful. So one single person initiated, then eventually can be effect to, I think, millions of people. So that's wonderful. That I learned. Otherwise, I don't know. Of course, a short moment is very impressive. Is when people just talk. Actually, I always, have this sort of attitude when meeting with people. Then some kind of education, learning. So each person. Or then yesterday, another person mentioned the last century. Over 200 million people killed. Then this morning here, the existing modern education is not adequate. These are, something very good. Very educational, yes. Like that.
When we spoke in India, I went to visit His Holiness in Dharamsala, and I was struck by the school for Tibetan children, that instead of putting children in a timeout, they have peace corners in the school. And the teacher, I saw a child misbehaving, and she said, "You're going to the peace corner." I said, "What's the peace corner?" And she said, "That's where we send children to reflect on their behavior, but we try to get them to reflect in a peaceful way."
I see.
Yeah. That's your philosophy. Well, that's what they told me anyway, but I thought that you talk a lot all over the world, how important it is to encourage children
Again,
in
not
school.
all over the world.
Not all over the world. I was just playing with you. But to encourage children's emotional well-being in school, that in fact makes them feel calmer, happier, more empowered. You're a big believer in that.
Yes. Whenever I meet some young people, I always give them hope and self-confidence and importance of these people. That's important.
I read a very interesting statistic the other day, Your Holiness, that last year in the United States there were 4,000 books published on happiness. 4,000 books.
Oh.
And that women in particular were less happy than they had been in the 70s. So we're buying more books on happiness, trying to get happier, and we're getting unhappier. Why do you think that is?
We need to research. I don't know.
You always told me it's very simple. Just concentrate on within, make yourself okay with yourself, and everything else will fall into place.
Yes, sir.
You told me that.
That's right. Peace, firstly, start within ourselves. Then that creates certain sort of atmosphere. Then other people also, I think, get some feeling, some vibration, including animals. So I often used to ask audience, including some professors, I think last year, I think in Oxford, I met some talk with some people and some professors on that great famous university, some professors. So I asked them one question, that in species of mammals, including these insects, on what level their brain have the ability to appreciate others something because of that, or affection. So because it seems to me mosquito don't have that kind of ability. Dogs and cats and many birds also have the ability. So looks mosquito and such sort of small insects seems to see no ability. So I'm wondering what level, what size of brain have the ability. So no answer. So that also one field to investigation.
Always much investigation. Finally, Your Holiness, some people here were talking to me about the need to rebrand the word compassion. Do you think we need to explain to people in a different way what compassion is so that they can put it into effect in their lives today?
I think as far as the Tibetan word is concerned, not necessary to do that. But English, I think that's those, because of those are the English expert. I don't know.
It's one of those things you know it when you see it?
Sinam you and the compassion pity. Yes, usually when I give the explanation or when I give talk about compassion, and sometimes I make the definition of compassion. So it necessitates some kind of explanation. So if we find one word without this explanation, is something because of the correct meaning. Yeah? That's good. It's simpler. But I don't know.
You do too now. So I want to thank you, Your Holiness, because I know that there are going to be several women that are going to come out here, and you're going to talk about the role of women in peace, in promoting peace from a compassionate place, and what role women can have on bringing our world to a more peaceful place. Do you know something about that? Yes? You have something to say about that?
Yeah. Then let us discuss later.
Yes.
Huh?
Thank you so much for talking.
Oh, you are leaving. Then let's go.
Thank you, Victor. So I don't know how long that. Perfect. Perfect. Okay, because there was. I'm right behind you. What?
I'd just like to thank Maria very much for hosting that wonderful, wonderful dialogue. There's something very special about a one-on-one dialogue, particularly when it's a conversation that began some time ago. We were privileged to become part of it today, and I have a feeling that it will be a conversation that continues on. But it's time now to move to our next event, which is Women and Peace Building. The panel is going to be moderated today by Susan Davis. Susan is a social entrepreneur extraordinaire, actually. She's the founder and CEO of BRAC USA, and you heard Peter Buffett earlier today talk about his work with BRAC, a very large NGO doing some very important on-the-ground, making a difference today work around the world. She walks the walk. She lived in Bangladesh for 4.5 years, so she knows of what she speaks. She has a new book coming out in January. I've already got a long list of books from speakers over the last few days, but I'm certainly going to add it to my list because among her other qualities, I can tell you she is a warm and compassionate, dare I say, individual. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Thank you so much to the Dalai Lama Center. Aren't they doing a wonderful job with this? We're actually having a gender-balanced panel today, not a panel of women talking about women's role in peace building. So I want to also congratulate the Dalai Lama Center for its progressive use of gender balance. The Dalai Lama, you have already talked and used the F word today, feminist. So I think we have a very exciting panel. In fact, it's a panel, as I look at all of you, of extremists. Extremists in the sense of, you remember when Martin Luther King wrote his letter from the Birmingham jail? And they called him an extremist. And at first he was a bit upset with being given that label. And then as he thought about it, he decided that maybe there was a measure of satisfaction, because wasn't Jesus an extremist for love, for justice? And so he embraced it, and he asked all of us, will we be an extremist for hate or for love? My hypothesis is all of these panelists are extremists for love and justice, and we're going to have a great time. Kitchen table conversation, a free-for-all that Jody Williams started, that Maria Shriver and His Holiness have continued, and that we have the rare privilege to actually continue the conversation that our musician artists have begun with Peter Buffett. And wasn't it wonderful, really, You already know something of Peter's biography. We're adding tap dancing to his long list of skills for that wonderful way that he managed to expand the program. Some of the people in the audience didn't know who his mother and father were when he kept talking about his mom and his dad. This is one of the most normal seeming individual to be the youngest son of the richest man or one of the richest men in the world. And I think Peter's work just shows us that human dignity is more important to the human spirit than wealth. Thank you, Peter, for joining us. It's my pleasure to introduce, I guess in Canada she really needs no introduction, the Right Honourable Kim Campbell, Canada's first woman Prime Minister.
My hometown.
Leading author, activist, and just launched her own website, kimcampbell.org. So she's going to be getting organized. John Cole, doing fabulous work interpreting for His Holiness. Thank you so much. Ela Bhatt from India is probably the world's greatest Gandhian leader in the planet right now, and has organized women from the very local level to the national level to the global level, and she said if she can't get justice, she's going beyond. The founder of SEA. And it's my privilege to introduce that Bangladeshi that His Holiness was talking about. Fazli Hassan Abed, the founder of BRAC, formerly known as the Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee, now just BRAC, because BRAC really is an extraordinary development institution empowering poor women and, as His Holiness said, working globally in Asia and Africa. Dr. Abed. And the incomparable former ambassador for the United States to Austria, the founder of the Women's Public Policy Program at Harvard University, Swanee Hunt, an incredible author and activist. And as Jody Williams told you earlier, we've left the chair empty for the Nobel Laureate who's still fighting for peace, building peace in Burma, Aung San Suu Kyi. So like any good kitchen table conversation, please, His Holiness, if you want to have a cup of tea or some cookies, dive in. We're going to let you rest just a few minutes as I ask the panelists to talk a little bit personally, and then we'll ask you to also tell us something about your mother and father or the key influences in your life. Because as Peter was talking, he kept talking about his mom and father. Did you notice that? And on the earlier panels, if you were here, we kept hearing about the importance of family and education. So maybe I can ask Ela Ben, if you would please start and tell us a little bit about your life and the key influences. What shaped you? Or who?
In the presence of Holiness, I really feel so embarrassed to talk about in the word I, but please forgive me. Actually, I have been a product of the days when our country was fighting for freedom. When I was in school, we heard all the time the news and happenings about fighting for freedom and then people were going to jail. When I was in the college, we already had the independence, and we were all full of the idealism to rebuild the nation. And our teachers told us to go to villages and live there and live with the poor. And then our parents also did not say no to us. And Gandhiji had shown the way. Mahatma Gandhi had shown the way. So as youths, we did not have any confusion in our mind that what will be our career and what will be the strategy and what will be, we didn't have to present PowerPoints or anything to prove ourselves. What we had learned was that the economy is from the perspective of the masses. So look at the economy from. So learn more about the masses and go to them, and that is how. So I started working with Textile Labor Association in Gujarat, in Ahmedabad. So it was it is a union, trade union of textile workers, started by Gandhiji and Anusuya in 1912. And as I passed my law, as a trained lawyer, I straightway joined the Textile Labor Union. And that is how, my career started. And
you actually heard stories from your grandfather, didn't you?
Yes, in the family also the influence was of nationalism. So my grandfather was the leader of the first batch that went for the Salt March, and he was beaten up, and then police was abusing, but because Gandhi's teachings, so not to talk back, but to listen, and then he was jailed several times. So those were the days, and so I joined the labor union. And this was the labor union of textile workers, where there was employer-employee relationship, and I was fighting for their labor rights in the court. But while doing that, I saw that there are thousands of economic activities which are done by men and women, where there is no employer-employee relationship, and they are not covered by any protective labor legislations. They have no entitlements of social security, they have no access to financial services, and they were not in the census of India were recorded as workers. They were recorded as non-workers, and they happen to be more than 90% of the workforce of my country. And same is the condition in most of the developing countries, and predominantly that is women. So women in the world of work, women, the entire informal sector was out of the picture. So that was the injustice in a big way. So that was my prime motive to fight, but fight on the Gandhian lines. And that has worked so long, thankfully.
Thank you, Eden. And Abid, you're born in roughly the same era. How did you become this champion for women?
I think my greatest influence, I've been listening to Compassion the last few years. And the one face that emerges in front of me when I think of compassion is my own mother. Was so compassionate that
No, here. You already here. No.
I think he just needs to move his own mic forward, so I think he just needs to.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I think that'll do it, yeah. 2 will be too much.
Vicky's here, never mind.
this one.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I think of my mother as the embodiment of compassion. it's not normal for people when somebody is ill, you send medicine. My mother not only used to send medicine, but she would send kerosene also, so that the person is not ill, is not in dark. She must have light. So she would think very deep details about human lives and how people suffer, and she would try to ameliorate that. And if I have learnt anything from her, is that bettered me. I suppose I have inherited part of it. And then what happened is, in 1970, there was a big cyclone in Bangladesh. 300,000 people died. And I used to work for Shell Oil Company. And then I went out to the villages where there were people, dead bodies strewn everywhere. Suddenly it occurred to me that the life that I was leading had no meaning at all. I mean, life and death was so stark in front of my eyes that it didn't seem worthwhile living the kind of life I was living. So, and that plus the liberation movement in Bangladesh, where there were millions of people died during the struggle for independence, in which I participated, again brought home to me that the life has to be quite different. So I started working with the refugees coming back from India. 10 million refugees were coming back from India in the beginning of 1972. And I started working in a small area, working for relief and rehabilitation. But then after a year of relief and building houses, building boats for fishermen, getting farmers to plant their fields, the people were so poor that one just didn't feel that one could just leave them to their own devices. One had to commit themselves for a long-term development of poverty. In other words, poverty alleviation became my next 37 years of work. So for the last 37 years, I've been working on poverty alleviation, particularly women as agents of change. So microfinance, where we have more than 8 million women borrowers. In schools, where we run 37,000 schools, where all the teachers are women, 70% of the children are girls. So it's the focus on girls and women as agents of change in our society that has been the main activities that we have carried out in Bangladesh. And then in 1972, suddenly in Afghanistan got rid of the Taliban, and again 3 million refugees started going back from Pakistan and Iran. And I thought it reminded me of the time of 1972, when millions of refugees coming back from India to Bangladesh. So we went into Afghanistan and started working there, and found that aspirations of poor people, dreams that they have about themselves and their families are the same everywhere, and we could really quite effectively do similar kind of work that we have been doing in Bangladesh over 30 years. So since then, of course, we have developed more confidence and have gone into other countries, 5 or 6 countries in Africa, in Sri Lanka. We are thinking of coming to work for Haiti. So maybe this is the first Southern NGO going global, trying to work with women in the global South.
And Swani, ever helpful. Thank you for helping out on that mic thing. You see how women always were just ready to pitch in and provide that. So how did you get involved in this work?
It was interesting, Peter. You and I have never been on a stage together, but actually, my father was there before your father, and he was considered the richest man of the world. So I'll meet you back in the hallway.
This is Hunt Oil from Texas.
But the story behind the story is that my mother, my parents were both raised on farms, and my father had no education at all, no formal education. But my mother was my father's mistress, and almost 40 years younger. And so he was 61 when I was born. So I was actually raised 5 minutes from the big mansion by a single parent. My mother was like a single mother, like with 4 children. And so when I became ambassador later, his wife died, we moved into the mansion, etc. When I became an ambassador, No. Here's the worst. We move in and he adopts us. Like, is that redundant or what? But anyway. So later, one thing led to another. I end up ambassador. I end up hosting negotiation between warring parts of Yugoslavia. And we had 2 rounds of negotiations. We go to the White House. This is '94. We go for the signing of the peace agreement between these 2 sides. And I look in the auditorium, and it's only then that I realize it's all gray suits. And I thought, I have been so sensitive about women's leadership, partly because of my mother's experience. Like, how could I not have noticed it? It's like, I'm one of the sensitive ones, How could I not have noticed it? And so I went to Harvard after that to teach, and the dean said, you should look at this question. So I asked at the UN, how come there aren't any women on the negotiating teams in Africa? And this UN official said, the warlords refuse to have them because they're afraid they'll compromise. And I thought, well, bingo, duh. Just imagine. If you could shorten the war in Iraq by 1 month, how about Afghanistan by 1 week? You could educate every girl in the world with what you would say to them. So that became my impulse, and I am such a believer in Brock and in what you're doing in India. I've heard about you forever. And the work of each person on this panel. The way I'm working on it is to go upstream to get women to be presidents, members of parliament, onto negotiating teams, really there where they can pull the levers so that they can create the budgets to supply what you need for your work.
Thank you, Swani. Thank you. So do I understand you right that you're working to get more Kim Campbells?
You bet.
So Kim,
More tenure.
how do you get to be a Kim Campbell? There are a lot of people out here taking notes.
They don't have to take notes. They were all part of the scenario. But it's interesting because I was born a couple of years after World War II. I don't know if I have to be more specific than that. And as you know, in the 1950s, there was a big movement to get women back in the home, and there was actually fewer women were getting graduate degrees at that period than were doing it in the 20s and 30s. But I had 2 remarkable women in my life, my mother and my grandmother. Because my mother, both my parents were in uniform in World War II, and my mother had horrified her mother by enlisting in the Navy. And she had joined a special team of signals operators where they trained in radio telegraphy, and they were stationed in eastern Canada to intercept the messages of German submarines who instantly came right up off Quebec City. So I grew up with my dad's picture in his army uniform and my mother's picture in her Navy uniform. So I grew up believing that girls could also serve their country. And my mother encouraged my sister and me to believe that girls could do anything, but to also understand that that was not a universally accepted proposition. And there was a wonderful woman who was the first woman mayor of Ottawa named Charlotte Whitten. And she was notorious for saying that a woman had to be twice as good as a man in order to be thought half as good, but fortunately that's easy. also, in the early 1950s, when the post-war baby boom generation hit the schools in Canada, and I'm sure it was the same in the United States, there was a great shortage of teachers. And my little grandmother, who at that time was, I guess, getting close to 60, and who had to quit teaching in 1921 when she got married, because married women were not allowed to teach. I mean, first of all, you shouldn't take a job from a man who might need it, and God forbid you might get pregnant and leave the little blighters wondering how that happened. Anyway, my grandmother took a refresher course and went back to teaching. And she didn't teach in city schools. She went up into little communities in northern British Columbia. One year she taught in Burns Lake, and she had to board with a farming family, and there was a porcupine in the outhouse. So I also had this other remarkable woman role model. So in terms of the sense of the limitation of age, that was never something that was taught to me. And I really was very fortunate in a time when women, in fact, were discouraged from being ambitious, when being just a teacher or nurse were the only jobs available to women, or that you were encouraged to do because you could quit it when you got married, but you could help your husband through school, etc. That I had two quite remarkable, even eccentric female role models that made me believe that I could do, and that was a huge gift to me.
Eccentricity. I know you've got a Kiss and Tell All book coming out soon, but is there anything that you want to preview with us now?
Sure. I do have a book coming out in the spring it's called Life is What You Make It, and it has a lot to do with identity and values and choices. And I grew up in not a wealthy household in terms of material things at all. My father still lives in the house we grew up in. I go home and I sleep in my bedroom when I go visit. And but he loved what he loves what he does to this day, and feels extremely thankful that he was born in a time and a place where he can do it. And basically make the same kind of living that most of us would make. He's not interested in the money. It happens, what he does makes a lot of money, but that's why he gave it all away, because it's the society he was born into that allowed him to do it. So it's not about him. It's about the dumb luck of being born when he was, the gender he was, the color he was, all these things in the city he was born in that allowed him to just do what he loves. So I grew up with that as a father, and my mother was very involved in the 60s in civil rights things in Omaha, where she could actually be on the ground doing things. And she would take me to a synagogue and a Baptist church and various places of worship to show me that there's very many ways to get to the same place. We had a very diverse world, and so it was very much, they had this core belief in the equality of humans, and so that, again, just having these parents is what it's all about, for sure. And my father, actually, I want to step back, because I always say that if we do all this micro-lending and education of girls, we're going to have a lot of poor, dumb men. So the one thing I want to step back and talk about actually feminine principles and behavior, because I think it's as much about that as it is about girls, actually, ultimately.
I agree.
Thank you. My father actually works in a very feminine way. I don't think he'd even understand that. It's just his natural behavior. But he will find something that's undervalued. He will look forever for some undervalued business and find the leadership in that business and say, you are doing something I think is worth it. And I'm going to invest in you and believe in you, and you just keep doing what you do. You don't have to change a thing. Eventually, the world will catch up and recognize your value. Now, in my world, that's a girl. And we're doing the same thing. We're saying you are undervalued in the marketplace, essentially, of gender balance, and someday this world is going to get around to recognizing it. I want to quickly say that my wife's story was that her mother was pregnant with twins. The male doctor said, no, you're not. So right away, the mother is being discounted. She goes into labor. She has what is my wife Jennifer's brother, Joe. They wheel her back in, say, "You're done. That's it." My wife was an afterthought from before birth. And it's stunning, because her story really drives us as well. And she grew up in a very, dare I say, patriarchal household. But again, her father's a wonderful person. I often talk about the idea that if you ask a fish the most unique thing about its environment, it won't say the water. But we are swimming in this thousands of years of domination and exploitation and top-down hierarchical thinking, but we just have to jump out of the fishbowl. So there you go.
Absolutely. So His Holiness, I understand, had a mother who gave birth 16 times. 9 survived. Your Holiness, can you tell us a little about your mother and father? How did they produce one of the greatest peace-building initiatives? You. What was it like?
Oh, nothing much to say. Of course, our mother, very, very kind, basically uneducated, just a farmer, farmer. But not only is kind to her own children, but also other people who really very, very difficult condition. Then she always really tried to help. In the sense, there's some beggars. At one time, I think near the in Chinese site, some famine which happened. So thousands of poor people just come through in our village. So in such case, our mother gave all the thing in our home, mainly food, all bread, all these things. That's really, I think, wonderful thing. Then almost we never saw our mother's sort of angry face, always calm. That I remember. Then my father, very short temper. Then nothing special stories.
Nothing special.
No, nothing special.
We know lots of uneducated farmers who are out there working. In every village there's a Rudy, isn't there, Ilaben? How do the women like Rudy or Hanshiba, how are they building peace? How is poverty linked to peace?
Oh. I believe in work. What hurts me the most is poverty. Poverty is just not accepted.
Yes.
It is powerlessness, and the whole population is just thrown on the margin. Despite they put in so much hard work, but still they always remain on the margin and never able to really enter the mainstream. On the other side, as an answer, for me, work is the most important thing. Work, like Bhagavad Gita, it says karma. So there is no escape from karma. Everybody works. God also works to hold this earth. So work without work, so I mean productive work. So every person on this earth wants to be engaged into productive work. So when millions of people, or maybe half the population, remains without work, it is just not acceptable. Half the population, or maybe a little less, remains hungry despite working. So working poor who contribute to the national economy, who contribute to the GDP and the prosperity, but they always remain half-starved. Our farmers remain half-starved. Our artisans have to commit suicide. And then, predominantly they are also women. Farmers, women are farmers, artisans women. So these women happen to be the member of our union called SEWA, Self-Employed Women's Association, started in 1972. And in 1974, we started our own cooperative bank. So in that sense, when they were marginal farmers, having small farms, producing all kinds of food grains, a little bit of cash crop, but their quantity being small, they had to go to the city market. They can't go. It is not worthwhile, viable. So for them, that is their cooperative form, and they formed it into a kind of rural marketing network. And that is, so our brand name is Rudy. Rudy is the name of the woman. You will find in every village, women named Rudy. So that is the brand name. So, farmers to farmers, and then artisans to artisans, that is how the products are being circulated. And slowly over 5-7 years, we have seen that the local economy has grown. And they have more. So similarly, there were in the desert districts of India, there were embroiderers. But embroidery was not for sale. But because they had to migrate, for work to other districts, so they had to do the embroidery and then sell it away to some trader who would come from the city, and then would have to sell it away at throwaway price. So we then organized the market of the embroiderers and continuous training, and then operated the scale, and that is how we then link the local market with the global market. So high value market at the global, and there our brand name is Hansiba. Hansiba is a 95-year-old woman. She knows about 23 stitches, traditional stitches. So half of them had become distinct. So with her, she is 90 years, but she has good eyes. So she has been training and then helping others to revive those stitches, and now the whole quality has gone up, and that is how the local, global, markets have touched each other, and there is a direct link now. So there is no middleman. So there is no, middle trader or middle. But we do have the best of the technical assistance, of designers, of setting up the systems. Right. So how to deal with the foreign market. But the income they have received, there has been no cut in between.
Right. So absolutely key link with economic freedom and political freedom.
Yeah, I do believe in economic freedom, because when Gandhiji talked about, political freedom, but in the same breath he also talked about economic freedom.
Right.
And that unless every Indian is economically free, who will not be able to enjoy the freedom.
Right.
So economic freedom is very important, and I consider my movement as part of what I call second freedom.
So peace, equality, and development are going hand in hand. But Swani, we hear talk all the time that we're fighting wars. The U.S. is fighting wars for oil.
Couldn't you have used another example?
I hate to bring it back to the family business, but you've now devoted your life to supporting women's efforts. Tell us about some of the hot spots, Afghanistan or Liberia, Colombia.
Sure. And in terms of the way women make a difference, like in Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf is the first woman president in Africa. And she was speaking at Harvard, and she said, first I'm a technocrat. I've worked for the World Bank, for the UN. I know how to get things done. Second, I'm a mother. And I care for the people of Liberia with this 14-year brutal civil war. I care for them with a mother's heart. And third, I'm a grandmother. And so I think about the future generations. And I'm thinking long-term what this country needs. Or in Afghanistan, we have worked a lot getting the NATO troops to work with the women leaders. And to do that, you have to have women, by the way, in the NATO troops, so they can talk with the women leaders in Afghanistan, because you can't send a man in to talk with the women. But it was the women in Kandahar, when there was that prison break and 700 Taliban escaped, it was the women who telephoned the NATO troops and said there's something going on in the prison, because they knew what was going on the ground. And you find that all over the world. They know what's happening. They know how much a bag of rice costs. A man, no offense, tends to not know that kind of thing, And so they know the link between the unrest and the poverty. Or the defense minister in Colombia, she said, we've got to get these children out of the jungles. The paramilitaries, they're just going to continue the cycle of the violence. So she set up a program of education and housing and families for these children to come to. Not only the 4,000 children came out of the jungles, 40,000 of the paramilitaries came out, and then the guerrillas started coming out, because she was thinking holistically, like, what do people need broadly? They need education. They need to have food on the table, and they started guaranteeing that as a way of demobilizing the soldiers. Those are just 3 examples. I mean, I have literally more than 1,000 hours of interviews with more than 1,000 women leaders all over the world, and we are connecting them with 6,000 policymakers to raise their voices.
Kim, you've played in that arena that Swani's talking about, and I understand you made a $100 bet with President Clinton and he lost.
No, I always win my bets with Bill Clinton.
Tell us about that.
Well, it's interesting because going back to kind of some of the underlying issues of here, why we're having problems with getting women recognized, and the point that Swani, the work that she deals with a lot of women in peacemaking, when the women are not around the table, and if you look at over the last 20 years in the major peace negotiations, women are never there. And so you have, as you had in Angola, you have amnesties in which men with guns forgive other men with guns for attacks against women. The women are never there. And the Angolan peace fell apart because women were not involved. But a number of years ago, in 1996, I was a founding member of an organization called the Council of Women World Leaders, which is an organization of women presidents and prime ministers, both current and former. And I forget what year it was, 2002, I think I was still the chair of the council, and I was at the AIDS conference in Barcelona, and I was introduced as the chair of this organization, and the gentleman said, of former women presidents and prime ministers. And I said, well, no, actually, it's former and current, and there are 34 living women who are or have been president or prime minister of their country. And I will give $100 to anybody who at the end of the evening can give me the names of all of them. So Bill Clinton, who was on this panel, started writing, and I said, either they're not paying you a pension or you're very competitive. But the point is that The next day he said, I can only come up with 17. And he could not even name all the women who were in office when he was president. And the point of this is that when women break through barriers, it is often seen as an anomaly. It's kind of an accident. So we don't take it very seriously, and they kind of fall off the radar screen. And the reason we created the council was to make visible the fact that women are leading around the world. They are presidents, they are prime ministers. We convene high-level women ministers with the World Bank. We bring together women finance ministers and central bank governors, and we created this body, the International Assembly of Women Ministers, which Madeleine Albright was the founding chair of. And the point is that when people say, well, what do we do about this? Part of the problem is we have to change the landscape from which people learn how the world works. And it goes back to my comment about my mother and my grandmother. I was really lucky that I was raised with perceptions about women's possibility that flew in the face of the landscape that I was surrounded by in this lovely but small provincial city in the early 1950s. And we need to find ways of making more visible the remarkable women. You know, I mean, BRAC is dealing with these women change agents, and yet you go to peace processes where people think it's okay not to have any women there. I mean, what are they thinking? So visibility is crucial.
Where's an example of where women at the peace table have made a difference?
Well, there have been so few of them. If you actually look at the negotiations, they're like 3%, I think.
What about Angola?
Well, Angola, the second time round, I think they engaged women, but that's, they paid a big price, maybe even.
No, I think that we need many women leaders, but we also need, feminineness in men also. And it is there. So how do we honor the feminine within men, and how do we try to get the best out of men? I think that is also the role of the women.
This is just what you were saying, right, Peter?
Getting kids when they're young and they don't have all these ideas of identity and us and them and all the complexities that we grow into. The social emotional learning component then is critical. I mean, because then you've got something that you can really build a life of compassion and what in some ways sadly is considered only feminine qualities. It'd be nice if it was just human qualities. I mean, all of this stuff is not they aren't women's issues anymore, they're human issues.
Amen. Amen. And although in Bangladesh, a majority Muslim country, you've got two women who rotate the head of state. It's not made a difference there. What's the strategy that you've been using to try to change things in terms of bringing in both the feminine and the masculine values, as Peter was talking about?
The way I looked at the situation in Bangladesh is that when there are children, male children and female children, you find the male child is playing somewhere and the female is looking after her younger siblings. It's right from the early age you find that the differential that we make in our male and female siblings in the household is that the girl children starts taking responsibility right from the very early age. And that, of course, goes on. She gets married, she starts taking responsibility for a young family. When her husband is poor, she manages poverty. So all kinds of responsibility that women take, men don't seem to come anywhere near the kind of responsibilities women take. The other day, President Clinton was telling us a story about a farmer in Africa who was apparently growing the best the highest yield in maize cultivation, and he was the best farmer and getting prize every year. So he decided to go and visit this farmer. And he went in, and the farmer said, yes, please come and have lunch with us. And President Carter went in. And then after lunch, he said, all right, to show me your fields. So the farmer take him to the field, and he said, Carter asks him, what do you do in your, what's the secret of your success? And he says, oh, I don't know anything about mine. This is my second wife who cultivates the crop. So even, the prizes that men get for the work of women in our society is just, So,
but you're trying to change these attitudes through education, right, for both men and women, which was the point that Ela Ben was making earlier. Because we know the problem here and the relationship between women's subordination to then violence in the home,
right,
in the communities, and across borders, within our countries and across borders. And there are an enormous number of conflicts raging today. While we've been chatting and laughing and having a good time, we know that thousands have lost their lives. And yet, women persist, men persist. His Holiness, I was wondering if you could share a little of what you know about what the Tibetan women and the Chinese women are doing to try to promote peace and get out of this horrible situation that's persisted for 50 years. I know the Tibetan nuns are organized. I'm wearing one of their bracelets.
Ask him Of
course, among Tibetan women, there are very heroic women as well who go out and reach out and help.
Very heroic Tibetan women who go out, reach out and help.
I think these things, I think more people should write these things with sort of numbers and facts. Then that brings, you see, the new awareness and also, I think, conviction. Through that way, I think some change, human attitude can change. So again, this is related with the education, awareness, and also media people also have some important role, can make some contribution.
That's a great idea, His Holiness. He's just asked for us to try to summarize and write the litany of actions and strategies that Tibetan and Chinese women have been implementing over the last 50 years to end this conflict. Is that something that Swani Harvard could help us with, and the Dalai Lama Center here?
No, Susan, I think His Holiness actually meant what all the panelists spoke about. These should be written down so that more people can become aware.
I misunderstood the suggestion. I liked my idea, so what was your idea now?
The Jews.
Apologies.
Yes, in general.
In general, what was presented by the panelists about the facts and figures and the impact of women leadership, if these could be made more widely known, he was saying that then a change of consciousness and attitude will arise.
Yes. Is there a peace movement inside China?
Difficult to say. of course, authoritarian system. Everywhere is control. And I think rule of fear. I think these people, I think that the totalitarian regimes is something different, exceptional case. We cannot make sort of example. And a free country, now these very much related with the topic this morning, creativity. In order to utilize creativity, there must be freedom. Without freedom, the individual creativity, they cannot function properly. Everything tight, fear, distrust.
So true. And don't you always make a distinction between governments, totalitarian governments, dictatorships, just downright corrupt or bad governments, and the people?
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. As a people, as a human being, but then there must be opportunity to express this human potentials.
Right.
Maybe I could speak to that. I know that in China, after, and I won't say what the political situation was because it's too dangerous, but after a very difficult and traumatic political situation, there was a woman who organized the mothers of, and then it had the name of this situation. But when I went to China and I wanted to meet with her so that I could record what she was doing as she organized, I was told it would be too dangerous because I would be easily followed. And so I couldn't meet her, even though she was working behind the scenes. So I contrast that with Guatemala, which had tremendous oppression and very violent oppression. And it was after the UN went in and created some kind of stability that civil society groups started springing up, human rights groups, women's groups. Those are the groups who insisted that there would be one woman, in the peace negotiations. Luz Mendez, she was the only woman. She was part of the rebel group. There were 30 people in the negotiations, one woman, and yet she represented that whole constituency, and she got written into the peace agreement gender equality. So she used the peace agreement as a way to get that piece of the society, of the culture restructured. So it makes a huge difference if you have some kind of security that will allow this kind of voice to be heard. Unfortunately, it's a circular kind of situation.
It is. And as we conclude our panel and try to perhaps summarize some of the ideas on this agenda for peace, equality, development, may I ask if the panelists would just toss in one more idea that perhaps people are sitting out in the audience still feeling like, well, what can I do? Just an individual. So we shouldn't leave on a note where people are trapped in their fear. Anyone? Ilaben.
I think hunger is the most serious problem. And why should anyone go to bed hungry? I think that's basic problem the world is not able to solve yet. So what do we do? The modern global food security system is totally out of place. And there is something basically wrong. I'm telling you, I for one, sorry, but so I believe that how do we encourage and see that millennium-old link, ancient link between the food producer and the food consumer directly. How do we set up the farmer and the consumer straight? We cannot depend on imported food. We cannot enjoy freedom with bottled commercial water or push button system. So at least for our basic staple food, if we can somehow make a discipline that our staple food that we will eat will be produced within our area around, say 100 miles or whatever limit. I think unless the local development happens, then I think and then what we have been trying into Seva is the same thing through Rudy. So I can say with little more confidence that it is possible. At least in our countries it is possible. Perhaps in these countries it may be more difficult. But we have to go back to the direct link between the producer and the consumer, at least in the case of our daily staple diet food. That's my humble submission.
Well, again, I think what Canadians can do is to pressure the government to ensure that no peace process or negotiations that they're involved with are ever conducted without the representation of women. In Africa, women have used the slogan, "Nothing about us without us." And women can be instruments of solving their own problems if they can only be at the table. Chairman Mao said women hold up half the sky, but at the moment it's the heavier half. They need some help.
Thank you. Swati?
To Americans who are listening and Canadians who know Americans, the U.S. Congress is 83% men. Elect many, many, many more women. We would not have invaded Iraq if we had had half of the decision makers
A quickie, we're in our final seconds here.
One thing that no one can argue with is that only a girl will be the mother of every child. So she has to be respected, whether it's in the media in this world or in the developing world in terms of rights. And so that's it. Just respect.
And Abid?
I think the most important thing one could do is invest in girls and women so that we can get gender equality in this world as fast as possible.
Amen. His Holiness, the last word.
Now, yesterday, today, much talk politics done. Now, nothing much to say. I don't want to just repeat. And then, I think just one answer after listening to these, because a panel from sort of suggestions or views or experiences. I want to say yes, everything. I fully agree. That's all. Then you mentioned, I think your experience, say according Indians case. So there's of course one, I think the people can learn from that. But it may not go sort of the same way, case to case. different country, different climate, different location. Also, I think maybe differences. So these things, I think we cannot generalize. Each one, I think religious faith also involved, and a traditional sort of habit also involved. So now I think that whole world become like one community. So the information, I think sharing, and then according to local situation, then implement. And some cases may have, say, a different method, but same goal, same aim. So education, research, education is, I think, very, very essential, very essential. So in any way, all our talking, the importance of women, female, that I 100% support, 100%.
His Holiness and the whole panel, it's been an absolute gift. Please thank the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education, Victor Chen. Thank you all. But I think that it is fitting that we just mentioned that this is the 50th year of exile. This year marks 50 years in exile, and the people of Tibet are still suffering under oppressive rule. And I think it's a good thing to just acknowledge the people of Tibet while we're here. And I would just like to say that the other Nobel Laureates, the other Peace Laureates, are launching a letter of support for His Holiness and the people of Tibet. You will be able to sign on with your own words of compassion. You can use your own creativity, maybe make a Blue Women's group and do something that way. I have no idea. But you can find it at the tibetfund.org, and it will be up on the October 15th. And please add your words to the people of Tibet for 50 years of not being able to really claim their own place. So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, now come back here.
That wasn't so bad.
Yeah. But I think it's really interesting that so many people want to bring about change in this world. People who've come to this conference want it to be a more peaceful planet. They want to do something that will change the direction that we're going. You did something that changed the direction. What's the best advice you could give to someone who thinks, you know, I'm not capable of bringing about that change myself?
I think that we are purposefully made to feel that it is so overwhelming that nothing can be done to make the world a better place. That if we can't make peace happen like this, if we can't make the world better like that, there's no point in trying. And I absolutely, positively disbelieve that. I believe that if each and every one of us in the world who want to see a better world seized upon one thing that makes them passionate to change and turn that passion into action, we would indeed have a better planet. And it is not magic. It's, you know, some of you have heard me say it before, get up off your butt and go do something. And don't expect somebody else to give you the answer. There's no excuse in today's world. One can Google and find an organization.
I know know you're applauding because it means there's good news on the way, and indeed there is. My name is Brenda Eaton. I'm chair of the board of trustees for the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education. And I'd just like to add my thanks before we move on to Peter and to Michael. If somebody does an encore, you get to thank them twice. We get to thank Peter and Michael many times. I would like now, though, to introduce you to Maria Shriver, a name known to many of you. Maria is an award-winning journalist. She's a best-selling author, and of course, she's the First Lady of California. She has long championed the working poor and the intellectually disabled, but she has also been a champion of women and women's issues for many years. In so doing, she's a mother of 4, and she, for also the last 5 years, has been host of the Premier Women's Forum in the US. And that's an organization that awards the Minerva Award. This year, in 2009, she was awarded the Xinyuan Pathfinder to Peace. And Maria is coming on now with Jody Williams, who you had a chance to meet a couple of times over the last few days. And for 10 minutes or so, Maria and Jody will have a conversation, and then the Dalai Lama will join us. I introduce you to Maria Shriver.
Okay, well, I think this is where His Holiness sits.
Oh.
Yes, don't sit there. We actually have no idea what we're doing. This is like, we're vamping until His Holiness gets here, but I guess the good news is he's left the hotel. He has left the hotel. And then he'll come here, and there'll be a lot of brouhaha back there. But so we thought, like women do, never at a loss for words, we'd come out here and just, you know, talk a little bit. I was just saying, Jody came to the women's conference that we have in California every October. We have about 25,000 women. And we have some men, and I always never understand why more men don't come, because 25,000 women, why wouldn't every man want to come, right? But we talk a lot about empowering women, and we talk about compassion.
They should go volunteer.
But people, Jody, are often feel like, well, I'm not smart enough, I'm not connected enough, I can't take on that issue, and therefore I'm not capable. But what would you say to someone? Would you say start small? What are the important steps to take to become an architect of change like you did?
My own story wouldn't be anyone else's, but I was given a leaflet on a subway stop in Washington when I was a teacher, Washington, D.C. And it was mimeographed. The old people here, like myself, will know what a mimeographed pamphlet is. Some of you young people would have no idea, but it turns your hands the color of the ink on the piece of paper. And it said El Salvador and other Vietnam with a question mark. And I am old enough to have protested the Vietnam War. And when the pamphlet indicated that the United States was intervening in yet another part of the world to mess with their self-determination, I got a little agitated.
Okay, now you have to stop talking, because they're like waving over there, and the real architect of change.
Now that is just not fair, Your Holiness.
Okay.
He does this to me all the time.
Okay. Did he have a good lunch? Did he have a good lunch? Yes? He thinks I'm crazy. It's okay. Okay. He's taking off his shoes. Maybe I'll do the same thing. Okay. So the last time I had the chance to speak with His Holiness was in 2006 in a room of, it was about 14,000 women, and we really try to emphasize to each and every person that comes there that they are the ones they've been waiting for, not to look outside for someone else to put into action what they feel. And you're a perfect example of being an architect of change. I think that's true. You saw an issue and you didn't sit around and wait for somebody else to come and do it. You did it. And I think that's, most people feel like, well, I can't do that, someone else has to do it. Did you ever feel like that?
Hell no.
Hell no. You can't talk like that when His Holiness gets here, so get it all out right now. Let's talk about peace and compassion.
Oh no, I'm going to talk about a different kind of peace and compassion. And I'm going to ask you to please turn up the lights in the audience so I can see. When the Dalai Lama gets back here, he may want it dim. I don't. I want to see who we're conversing with, please. I'm going to give you a break.
You're going to give me a break? What are you going to do? I'm just getting going. You haven't even answered my question yet. You haven't even answered the question.
No. All right, I'll be back.
You'll be back. Okay, now
back.
you're going to make a statement. Okay.
I'll be back. You wouldn't want me to take my clothes off, would you? I'm going to take a minute before the Dalai Lama gets here, and poor Maria hasn't been here with us, so she hasn't had time to learn our compassion here. So you can deep breathe. And I learned tap dancing in grade school, but that's not why I'm standing here. There's been an elephant in this room, and I'm going to... Is that the elephant? How'd you get up there? The elephant in the room is that we haven't mentioned Tibet. And we have mentioned Aung San Suu Kyi, our sister Nobel Laureate, who is imprisoned in Burma. We have mentioned Gaza and my sister laureate Mairead Maguire trying to take humanitarian aid there and being arrested in international water. We have mentioned Darfur. We have mentioned the Congo. But here we are with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and many other people from Tibet. And we haven't, the elephant up there is a Tibetan elephant, I'm learning. Yet we haven't we haven't acknowledged Tibet, and I assume it's maybe because we consider His Holiness to be, in some ways, the embodiment.
But at the time, and His Holiness asked the crowd and said, women need to be involved in more influential positions in the world. You said the world will be better off because women have more warm-heartedness, they are more nurturing, they are more compassionate. How are we doing in the world? How are we doing? How have we done in those last 3 years? Are women making a difference in the world?
I don't know.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. He always says, I don't know, and then I push him and he goes, okay, well, I know a little bit. I'm like, the man has written so many books and he like reads all day, meditates, and he's like the smartest person. You do too now.
I think at least I'm quite sure, I think as a result of there are sort of conversation, and also many occasions in Europe and also America, I, on a number of occasions, you see, appealing people in general, particularly female, because of biological factor, female more sensitivity about others' pains and suffering. So our time we need special effort for promotion of human compassion. In that respect, female should make more important role. So perhaps sort of appealing, having these things, maybe more number of female may get more self-confidence and more willingness to do. That I'm quite sure. But real significance of the change, I don't know. So you should investigate.